Hi mathematicians, before you begin this video, make sure that you have a pink, a yellow, and a blue highlighter, and a pencil and a red pen. You should have all of those in the classroom supply areas. So if you don't have all of that, pause the video and then begin it again once you're ready. In this video, I'm going to teach you about literal equations, and literal equations have two or more variables. Please grab your yellow highlighter and know that when a question asks you to solve for something, it means that whatever variable they tell you to solve for needs to be isolated. So, for example, in problem number 1, you see that we have here an equation that has two variables in it. So it is a literal equation, and it is asking us to solve for b. So that means if we are finished with our task, by the end of the problem, we should have a b all by itself, isolated on one side of the equal sign. So I always like to highlight the variable that I'm trying to isolate. And what that means is that it is going to stay where it is. That is the variable that I am not going to move. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the same side of the equation where the b is. And I can see that it has an h sitting next to it. And as we've learned in previous activities, when you see two things sitting next to each other, that means multiplication. So this is another way of saying h is being multiplied by b. Now we need to ask ourselves, grab your pink highlighter, please. What is the inverse of multiplication? And the inverse of multiplication is division. But remember, now that we're in big kid math, instead of using the division symbol, we're going to use a slash to mean division. So now please write the problem down here, and we're going to solve it together. I highlighted my b to make sure that I remember that that is the one that is not going to move. So that means in order to isolate b, and because division is the inverse of multiplication, I'm going to isolate the b by dividing by h. If I divide by h, since multiplication and division are inverses of each other, my h is no longer here, and it is canceled out. So now my b is isolated like I want it to be. However, I need to keep in mind that since this is an equation, I must do it the same division on both sides of the equal sign. So I'm also going to divide my other side of my equal sign, which is my 5, by h as well. And since I don't know what h is equal to, there is nothing else I can do in this problem, but I have satisfied my goal because the b is isolated. So this is my final answer after solving this equation for b. So again, when you're solving an equation for a given variable, you're just moving the parts of the equation around to get the variable isolated that the directions tell you to isolate. Now I'm going to look at example 2. Example 2 says to solve for d. So that means when I have completed the problem, I should have d fully isolated all by itself on one side of the equal sign. Now I need to look and see what operation is on the same side of the equation as the variable. And if I look, I have this operation, which we know means division. So it's the operation D divided by F. Now I need to consider what operation is the inverse of dividing by F, which is D multiplied by F. Now I'm going to bring my equation down so that I can work on isolating my variable. And I'm going to highlight D because I know that is the one that I'm isolating. So that's the one that is not going to move. And to cancel dividing by F, I'm going to do the inverse, which is multiplying by F. And because division and multiplication are opposites or inverses of each other, that means that the F is now canceled and my D is isolated exactly like I need it to be. But I also must remember that I need to do that inverse, that multiplication on both sides of the equal sign. So I am going to put my multiplication on the left-hand side as well. And now I have my D isolated and the F times M on the other side of my equation. And I should note that even though this is correct, I could also write it like this, just with the F and the M next to each other, because that is another way of saying multiplication. The only way I can't write it is I cannot say, use your red pen for this, I can't say F times M with the X because remember that this is an easy way to get it confused with the letter X. So either of these options is okay, but do not write it this way. Now for problem number 3, what am I being asked to isolate? I'm being asked to isolate B because it says that I need to solve for B. So when I get finished, I should have B by itself on one side of the equal sign. We can see that there is an operation of addition that is on the same side of the equal sign. So the operation that is on the same side of the equal sign as the variable that I need to isolate is addition. And I know that the inverse of adding B is going to, of addition, is subtraction. Now I'm going to bring my equation down. I'm going to remind myself that the variable that's not going to move is B. So that means that I must cancel out the H because the H is what's on the same side of the equal sign as the B. And so I am going to subtract H. Once I do that, because a positive H and a minus H are inverses of each other, those are going to be canceled out. And now my B is isolated on the left-hand side of the equal sign, but because it's an equation, I have to remember to do it on both sides. So I also need to subtract H from the right-hand side of my equal sign. Because I don't know what J and H are equal to, I can't actually do a calculation. So I'm just going to have to leave it written as J minus H in 3 different parts. So this is my answer. B equals J minus H. For my last example, it's asking me to solve for A. So I know when I get finished, I need to have an A isolated on the left-hand side of the equal sign. In my next step, I can see that on the same side of the equal sign as my A that I have subtraction. And I know that the inverse is going to be addition. In order to cancel out the F, I will need to add F, because adding F is the inverse of subtracting F. And once I do that, my minus F and my plus F will cancel each other out because they are inverses. And so now I have my A isolated exactly the way I want it to be. But I've got to remember to do that plus F on both sides of my equation, because that's what we have to do to stay balanced. And like our last example, since we don't know what Q and F are equal to, there's no calculations we can do. So our completed version of our problem is A is equal to Q plus F.